Welcome to Around the Corner, a podcast about leadership and organizational performance. I'm Ayana James.
And I'm Megan Liu. Welcome to Season 1, where we talk with 9 future-focused leaders and dig into their stories and perspective, as well as wisdom about driving change and leading into the future. At Strad, we believe that leadership is the engine of performance, and our work creates the pathways to make that possible.
Conversations like this podcast help shape our own work with leaders, and we are excited to share with you. Perhaps you'll be challenged or take away an insight that enriches your own leadership journey. Welcome to Around the Corner.
Welcome to another episode of Around the Corner. Today, we're in conversation with Laurie Goodfellow, Regional Vice President of Private Banking at RBC. Laurie's career with RBC has spanned roles across sales, operations, and human resources. And her story reflects what it means to grow with purpose inside a large, evolving organization. Laurie's philosophy is grounded in a fluid approach to leadership, knowing when to lead from the front, when to guide from behind, and when to work shoulder to shoulder with others. She speaks about building high-performing teams through trust, care, and curiosity, and about the power of choosing a lattice career, one built on breadth, depth, and deliberate experiences, and not just the next rung on the ladder. In this conversation, Laurie shares what she's learned about confidence, humility, and creating space for others to succeed. Her story reminds us that performance is human work. It's about how we show up, how we listen, and how we lead together. Let's step into the conversation.
Welcome, Laurie. We're so glad that you're here today and have taken time to be with us. Laurie, Megan and I are excited for this conversation. We've come to know you somewhat personally and professionally, and really love the vantage point that you bring onto leadership and running a really successful team and portfolio. To kick us off, it would be wonderful if you would share with us sort of like your understanding of 3 key words: leadership, performance, and potential. What's your perspective on what those words mean in your context?
Well, good afternoon and good day, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Leadership, performance, and potential. I think they're so connected, those words. When I think about leadership for me, I think about fluidity. I think leadership is important from leading from the front, really setting the course, the tone. And then there's times that you need to pivot and you need to lead from behind, encouraging, supporting, and other times it's side by side, rolling up my sleeves and really winning together. And I think all of those 3 components of leadership for me really help build the culture within a team and across the business.
Laurie, just from the get-go, it'd be awesome for you to tell us a story about where you saw that fluidity, those 3 things coming together. Like when you think about a moment in your experience, what comes to mind?
I think about, I made a change. So we moved from Ontario to BC. And quite honestly, I moved into a role that, definitely was putting me outside of my comfort zone. I worked with, individuals that had deep expertise. And I'm suddenly leading this team and definitely, from my perspective was really, almost second guessing myself as to what value that I would bring from this team. And so, I think I was intentional about, creating, a space where everyone could share and be heard and be seen and set an expectation on what we needed to achieve. But that leading from behind was very much that encouraging because I needed them to do what they did best. And so how did I support and remove obstacles or help them move work forward? That was really the value that for that team in particular that I could really bring to the table.
Okay, love it. Okay, you feeling warmed up? Voice in the room?
Yeah, maybe.
All good?
Yeah. You tell me.
Okay, let's talk about something that you know really well, your own story. So take us back to where this story started of leadership, perhaps when you first identified as a leader and wanted to step into that mantle and have that opportunity. Bring us along a little bit of your career path.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I was a little bit of a late bloomer in terms of my desire and growth journey. I grew up in a small, very small community, 350 people, and so I don't think that I ever gave myself permission to, dream big enough or see myself in some of the roles that I have today. But I definitely, from a very young age, always had that drive, that sense that I wanted to accomplish more, to give more. And so I think as I built my career, it was that confidence in an aspiring higher, was really around some of the role models and other women that were part of my career journey. I've only ever worked in all of my adult life for one organization with RBC, but I think I've been privileged to have multiple careers within that organization. And so, sales and sales leadership, some time in human resources and operations. And I think all of those pieces have really, built that foundation. We talk a lot about lattice versus ladder. And I think that was a really important part, not only for, building my ability to be competitive for more senior roles, but also building my confidence in knowing that I could deliver on that.
Hmm. That's so rich. I'd love to pull out a few things in that if I could.
Of course you
One of the
do.
things you said, of course I do. Classic Ayana in action. Let's pull at it, Laurie. Let's pull at it. One of the things I love that you said was you gave credit and thanks to women that you have worked with. Tell us, paint a picture of like the persona of some of those aspects that you have brought, that you've learned from other women in leadership roles. What are some of those things?
Oh, well, I think, and so many, as I think back, different people at different seasons, that were really important. So if I reflect on one of my early leaders who for sure was that one that pushed me to take that leap into leadership at a young age, the phrase "tough but fair" would absolutely be what I would describe her. And subsequently, she's been a good friend, and she's long retired, but we still stay in contact and would be somebody that I lean into. But she attributes me to the reason that she does performance reviews with a pencil as opposed to a pen, because I would challenge. But I think that challenge
Oh,
was a result of what she provided with me and the confidence that she built in me. And then I think
I love that.
about one of the defining moments, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but from a distance, I would say Katie Taylor, who was the first woman board of chair for
Yeah.
RBC, and she really brought this notion that you know you you can have your all. You can't have it all, but you can have your all. And for me, that was, you can still, if you want to be a parent, and have that opportunity to do so, you can still do that and have a really successful career. And you might make different choices that you're not, joining the book club or whatever those pieces are. But, not, I think as women, often we put our own constraints on ourselves. And she really opened that
Mm.
door to say, figure out what you want and then don't apologize for it. And don't let other people's wants or limitations define who you are as an individual. And then
Oh, I love
lastly, I
that.
would say, the current leader, so our head of private banking, that care, that notion
Mm.
of wanting to win and drive and be the best that you can possibly be, but being incredibly human and caring, are the things that she's really brought into my leadership in a really elevated type of way.
Well, that's amazing. We're only 3 minutes into this conversation, and I'm scrambling to like write down all the nuggets of wisdom. I had the privilege of meeting Katie Taylor. She was also chair
Mm,
of the Governor General's Canadian Leadership Conference in
yeah.
2017, and she gave a plenary talk. And I have the photo of her snapping a photo of her when she had this tagline. Yes, about giving it your all and the specificity about like clarifying what that means for you. What do you want to get after? What does the shape
Mhm,
of your signature story and signature leadership look like? And then go after that. That's the only
mhm,
narrative that you could truly pursue with authenticity. So I love that you
mhm,
lifted that up.
mhm,
Um, Megan, it's okay if I keep going. I feel like I'm
mhm,
hogging already. But
mhm,
Lori, the other thing you said, almost like it was a toss, and we're like, we all know it, but we don't all know it, is when you said lattice versus ladder. Now, where
mhm.
did that come from? And tell us more about, I think I get the image, but tell us more about what that means to you.
Yeah, we talk about it a lot across our organization, that importance of, really building out that foundation. And I think, especially in, today's uber competitive marketplace, everyone's looking to strive what that's what's next, what next, and really having some benefit of understanding that a career advancement doesn't necessarily always mean that next promotion. It can be a sidestep. I often talk
Hmm.
about your career being a little bit of a hallway of doors, and all of the doors early days are open, and as you step through and get different experiences, that again, back to conscious choices, understanding that by not doing certain experiences, some of those doors might close. And that might be completely fine. But I've always said that, I don't want to, I always want to know that I am competitive for that next opportunity. I never want someone or an organization to tell me that I don't have that experience to at least be considered for it. And so for me, that's been a big piece of my career. And I also think it helps, um, you know, keep us grounded, recognizing that, the competition is real. And so it can, how do you make yourself have a seat at the table?
Hmm. Conscious choosing.
Mm-hmm.
Hashtag. Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Lori, as you reflect back, and I now have the lattice picture in my head, what were some of your key skill set buildings, foundation buildings? What did you really emphasize? What situations did you put yourself in, create for yourself?
Yeah, I think, Megan, I like to think that well, I know this about myself. I'm a little immediate gratification. So, I think
Mm.
over time I became a little intentional. I think, wanting to always have something new, striving for something more
Mm-hmm.
early days. And I benefit from working with an organization that does offer lots of opportunity. And so I don't know that I was as intentional earlier in my career as opposed to this sounds interesting and I want to do more. But there were a couple of instances. I had an opportunity and I had been in leadership. And once you're in leadership for a little while, I think there's this notion of, am I actually delivering results or do I just happen to work with really great people who do great work? And so, that imposter syndrome, I think, can creep in a little bit. And so I had an opportunity to shift back into an individual contributor role. Quite honestly, it was a role that I was asked to do. It was a role that I really didn't want to do. That the type of work that it was not necessarily playing to my skill set. Again, back to that immediate gratification. This was much more of a, strategic thinking, long sales cycle type of work. But I took a leap of faith and trust in the individuals that had presented the opportunity to me. Um, and I would say it will never go down as my favorite role, but it was probably the role that I learned the most about myself in terms of how I could work and how when you have the opportunity to invest time in that thinking and creating space for thought. As opposed to just execute, 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 the outcome can be so much greater and the importance of that. So, I think that would be one in particular that stands out for me.
Yeah, sometimes the hard things are the required pieces for true development and growth.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, interesting.
And it's the reflection when you realize that in the moment, it doesn't necessarily feel like that.
It's great wisdom that you're sharing to Ayana's points early on in this conversation in terms of um, sometimes both the stretching into a new opportunity, seeing it through the lens of opportunity, and having the patience. Like your point on so much of, I think today's world is also about instant gratification and how do you slow down and see a situation for all the benefits that are there versus something more immediate. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Laurie, you are exercising or lending your leadership in a very particular context, the Royal Bank of Canada. And you've been there for, you said, your entire career. Would you just bring Megan and I and our listeners just a little bit into like that world? What is it about that world that is fascinating to you, that has allowed you to have a latticed career? And perhaps just frame for us like what the impact is that you're trying to make, and then we could talk a little bit more about how you actually lead within that context.
Yeah, banking, it sounds so
Yeah,
corporate
why
and
bacon?
and comes with such stereotypes. It was interesting. When my son was in college, he sent me a text one day and he said, Mom, you know, when did you know that banking was your passion? And I texted him back and said, I graduated from university with a whole bunch of student loan debt and needed a job. Have I
Mhm.
found passion? Absolutely. But, when I was, graduating, I'm not sure. So, I started, as I said, at RBC in the same small town. My parents owned the general store. I worked at the bank, which was four doors down from our store. And so while I was still in high school, I was a client advisor. The bank paid more than my parents paid me to work at the store, and I continued to work part time while I went to university. And in that moment, if you had have told me that RBC, I would be here, till the end of my career, I would have told you were crazy. But I think the opportunities, that multitude of careers that I talked about and the people is what keeps me here. And my story is so similar to so many of my colleagues as you go across the organization. People talk about being, a people-centric business and that sense of collaboration. And because I've been here for so long, I don't necessarily, have a reference point with the exception of the
Mm.
individuals that I meet from outside of organizations or when I'm recruiting individuals to join us and they come in and then they experience it and then come back and whoa, it is very different. So, for me, we're a relationship bank, and it
Yeah.
really is both with, our teams as well as our clients. So,
Mhm.
and now I forget the
Exceptional.
rest of your questions. Yes.
What's the impact that you're making? What's the impact you think banking is making, and therefore your leadership within it?
Yeah. At the end of the day, everybody needs to move money, and that's not what it is that we do. It's really around how do we help people achieve their goals and their dreams. We talk about how do
Mm-hmm.
we help communities prosper and clients thrive, and that's really what we're about. How do we provide that advice? How do we create mitigants to make sure that people can achieve all that they want, whether it's in their personal lives, in their business lives. And I always say that bankers, are like entrepreneur wannabes. We want to do it, but our risk management tells us that we're a little too afraid to do it. And so through supporting and doing our part to enable entrepreneurs and clients do that, that's where we get our excitement.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's important to have an opportunity just to reframe because we choose to lend our leadership to things that matter to us. And sometimes they're external brands or there's just lack of understanding. And to know that your value set is aligned to the yes of where you've chose to express your leadership is really powerful. Laurie, at the heart of who you are, people-centered relationships. So let's talk a little bit about how you lead with teams, how you lead with others. So I want to talk a little bit about high-performance teaming. Is that a phrase that you use? Is that what you strive for? What's a little bit of your approach to working with others and getting the best out of what they create together?
Yes, definitely high performing teams is definitely a phrase that we use consistently. We really talk about that. Really, how do you hold a high bar?
Mm.
And I think for me, it's around making sure that again back to that North Star. What are we striving for? But then providing individuals that opportunity for that input so that they can feel seen and feel valued. And how do you get that diversity of thought and experience to really make that magic? And so it's not
Mhm.
just one way in terms of getting to that performance. We talk a lot about the how you achieve what you achieve is just as important as to what you achieve. So I think that piece, giving that autonomy to create that in a way that drives a collective result is important. And then I think there's that coming back to that care piece, because at the end of the day, we spend more time at work than we do with anyone else in our lives. And so how do you create those connections? Because when we, work together and we respect and know and like one another, it makes the work a whole lot more fun, but it also makes it a lot easier to get the work done.
Mhm. Where is the This is a question probably Megan has in her head right now because we love the question around strategy. Where in that formula, that arithmetic of autonomy and diversity of thought and care, what's the role of strategy? Strategy and maybe adjacent to that strategic thinking at the level of teaming that you're working at.
Yeah, we, in the work that we do, we're really, strategic execution, and we have great partners that are looking at that longer term strategy, that big S strategy. Back to my,
Mhm.
immediate gratification. Really good at the small S strategy. I can't wait long enough for that 5 to 10 year outlook. So I want it now. But I think that's the piece where coming together to really think about, that big S strategy and what are then those real tangible pieces that we want to be known for in the markets that we deal with, and what are those pieces, and then how do you build underneath those tactics, and those tactics for different teams and different individuals are slightly nuanced and different. I think early in my career, it was this notion of there was only one right way, right? And if you surround yourself
Mm.
with a bunch of mini me's, because I'm so brilliant and everybody will just get work done, I think that realization that would be a disaster. And so having those different approaches and that different mindset really makes the collective better. And back to that high performance, and those results really become elevated at that point.
Mhm.
Hmm. Lori, it's beautiful and it's hard.
The humans.
So the humans. It's beautiful and it's hard. What are some of the ways in which you foster diversity of conversation, of perspective? I can imagine, the tables that you're convening. How do you do it?
Yeah, I do always say the humans, right? Because I mean, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the fun part and the hard part to your point. I
Yeah.
think a lot of humility, I think so often, as you look around the room, and definitely, early in my career, you look around the table and of course you're smarter than, half the people there. And I think, age comes some wisdom in understanding that, and also not
Yeah.
taking myself too seriously. I literally have hula hoops in my office for those days when, we take life a little too seriously and things are a little too heady. And, sometimes we pull out the hula hoops just to bring some levity into the room. So I think that humanity piece, for me, is an important part. I also think curiosity, and curiosity to some extent has become a little bit overused, but you actually have to like people and you have to be curious and wanting to get to know them. I think about the quote from Theodore Roosevelt, that whole, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And for me, that's a big part of how I lead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful. I can't wait for the hula hoops.
There's also, there does tend to be some gender differences, which then makes it even more fun in an industry where, we need some balance. It is the one area that I think there's some differences.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Awesome. Mm-hmm.
And Laurie, as I'm listening to you, I'm also hearing your love for execution, strategic execution, doing that at the highest possible level with others. And with the humans, not always easy. And what you need to execute against can be quite sticky, problematic, like you're solving problems in the midst of it. So would love to hear a little bit about your leadership mindset, approach, philosophy, as you tackle challenging problems in the space that you are individually, and how you do that with others too. So what's your approach to problem solving in sticky situations?
Yeah. I think remembering that we can do hard things is, and we've got that proven piece, but I think it's around that listening, listening with intent, setting the stage so that you can be open to it. Sometimes it's coming back, and how do you break it down to its simplest parts, and then rebuilding. And I think giving everybody that voice, creating time. Sometimes I think when there's those sticky parts, it's also, you're up against deadlines, and so then the heart starts to race and your brain doesn't work as well. And so that remembering to how do you slow down. And it's one of the things that, back to my trait of, going fast and hard, is one of the ones that I have to really work at. But for me, it's about how do you get input, but then at the end of the day, there's a decision to be made, and how do you have confidence with, based on the information that you have, to move forward.
Mm-hmm. There's so much art and science in that. I don't know who to attribute the quote to, but it goes something like, great leaders know that they can't create more time, but they know how to slow it down. The great ones know how to slow it down. And it sounds like the artfulness of that is something that you lean into. I just drew little squares of like big problem, break it down into like little squares, little problems, open it up. And then with the smarts of the humans you've got, reorganize that, reshuffle that to see what the possible solution might be, over time. Back to Megan's point, like what does it take to create space for time in a fast-moving organization that you're in? Is that about regular times for problem solving? Mondays at noon, we meet at this time. Is that break-in meetings? Like how do you actually fit that in?
Yes, because the calendar can control us all if we're not careful. I think for sure. I think those
Agreed. Yeah.
that structure around regular check-ins and having those dedicated times, bringing it to regular leadership meetings to create space for just open discussion and dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it's also about having that flexibility to be able to dive in, knowing your team members. I think, there's somebody on my leadership team that, I know if there's a problem, it's a, 5:30 at night and they're coming to sit down, because that for them is when, they can process and they can finally get around to it, versus, the individual who, goes home and ruminates overnight and then comes first thing in the morning ready to speak. So I think you also need to balance your approach to, those individuals, and recognize that everybody has a slightly different style, and you have to adapt to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me think that your calendar and your day, you're paying attention to your own task list, but you're very observant about what's happening within your team and what they need and where to break in and where to keep rhythm of business, keep pace.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Care to the individual, Laurie, is but the humans, care to the individual. There's a theme here. Um, how have you come to know caring at the individual level is part of your secret sauce? What have you learned along the way? What were your moments of coming to that realization?
Yeah. Foundationally, I look back to growing up in a small town of 350 people. My parents owned the general
Mm-hmm.
store, and, my mom was a people person. Our general store was the communal meeting ground where people came and had coffee and, smoked their cigarettes and chatted about what was going on. And so I think just by the DNA within me, that was a big piece of it. And then I think throughout my career, again, I go back to some of the leadership that I have. And then, several years ago, we had Dr. John Izzo join us, and he talked about, having his little black book and the importance of writing down because, if you have children or if you have pets, those are the most important things to you. And so, I took that to heart, and I keep in my list of pieces, whose dog and what's the dog's name and how old is the dog. And so that connection piece, I think for me is really important in knowing people. Work is such a small slice of who we are. So much of around that influences how I show up every day. And then lastly, I would say I worked, again, very junior in my career. I worked with this woman, and she taught me two things that I keep with me. It's, no one walks through the doors to do a bad job. No one's looking to sabotage your day. And that, everyone on a team is like a spoke in a bicycle. Some of them might be a little crimpled, but we need all of those spokes to keep the bicycle going down. And again, I was probably 22 when that was shared with me, but I've carried it through.
Yeah, Lori, I feel like we've got, language or words for this today around like empathy and, stakeholder led or focus on the individual. But yeah, you're showing us today that this is just a deep DNA, deep sense of who you are, deep sense of, your own belief system, and clearly how much that's linked to your own performance. So yeah, thank you for storytelling.
Thank you.
Megan, we've heard it quite a few times, I think, in the conversation so far, that care is a competitive advantage in many ways. And I'm feeling that the tightness, the closeness of care and competitive advantage, and when it's linked with authenticity, like who you intrinsically are, as we're seeing in you, Laurie, yeah, the powerhouse of what that's unlocking. So, Laurie, if I'm almost like building a framework in my mind, care, your own sense of authenticity, and the other node that I want to pin then, if building a triangle, does that also connect to a sense of growth mindset for you? Like care, authenticity, growth mindset, because you're in the business of building relationships. More relationships is better, I imagine. Hey, scorecards and more. And together, somehow that little wheel means performance. People are getting things done, right? They're hitting that translation of strategy in the context that you are. How do care, authenticity, growth mindset, how do you think about that?
Yes. I think they all link together because growth mindset is, the day that you stop learning or thinking that you've hit the finish line is, that's not, the growth mindset is there is no end game. There's always more that we can do. There's always that growth piece. I think that the care piece for me brings in that notion that, it can be hard. There is some reality to it. And, there might be some step backs before step forwards, and that's okay. So for me, I think the growth mindset is recognizing that, it's always, better. What does better look like? Every day there's something more. I think the care and authenticity piece recognizes that, occasionally we might actually dip below that line. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm there to help support and bring back up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Great. My first line of work, Laurie, as you know, was in some I call a caring profession. And I know that to hold it as authentically as a competitive advantage and to keep learning, it can be deeply draining. Like it takes a lot of like personal wellspring, like a personal reservoir. So I'd love to turn there for a second and hear you talk about some of the personal practices that keep you as a seasoned executive and all that that requires, and doing it with this human-centered, care-focused, strategic care-focused approach. Is it, two eggs in the morning and a run? Like, how do you, what are some of the practices that you lean into?
Yes, and that expression of care but don't carry is one that I, share often because I think that's a really
Mm,
important. And I think it was Brene Brown who shared that. But it's, that balance of doing that, which can be really hard when you are authentic about the care piece.
yeah,
Um,
truly.
I also think I don't take myself too seriously. And I have a wonderful husband and some children who remind me that I'm not really that great or that important on a regular basis. So I think that humility piece feeds in. Um,
Mm,
but in terms of how do you care for yourself, and I think in particular for women, it's an area where we always think that we have to do, and there's this notion of guilt that comes to caring for ourselves. And so good or bad, I think that I've given myself permission not to feel that sense of guilt, and I think that I do take that time. So, inconsistent is what I would say about my care for
mm,
myself, though. So I love all things outdoors. So definitely, spending time, being outside, whether it's running, whether it's hiking, whether it's going for a walk, I think is a big piece. Exercise plays a big component. Laughter, back to the not taking myself too seriously, and creating that space to re-energize and refocus. Those are all things that I bring into it, and some great vacations and food in the midst amongst that is also a great way to bring it all to refresh.
yeah. Yeah. Back to Miss Taylor's comment, right? Like knowing what works for you and
Mhm.
going after that and integrating that. That's thoughtful. Awesome. Grounded in self, we're looking internally at your team. Maybe the other shift to explore is that your role also has quite a bit of external focus. Like my body's turning from inward to outward. External focus with clients and on behalf of clients, paying attention to what's happening in the world at a macro level. Um, what about that is, first of all, am I making the right assumption? Like, is that actually what your day looks like? And what about that are you paying attention to when you shift to the external? What are some of the signals that you are reaching for, noticing, looking toward?
Today, I think the given the brand RBC, that comes with responsibility, and I think there is that responsibility on sharing and stewarding. Um, but I feel incredibly fortunate that I work with some incredibly bright, capable individuals, and so my role I really see is that connecting and sharing. So, sharing those insights from the experts, bringing some of those experts to our clients and to our communities so that, we
Hmm.
can again back to that, expansion of mindset and educating, that's a big role that we play. And how do we curate and deliver? Because, it's not, Laurie Goodfellow that's providing this, is really the deep expertise of different mindsets. And we have access to a lot of those. And so that connection piece, I think, is one of the areas that I think is important. And for me, that also brings in, that notion of relevance as we look external. How do we stay relevant in our communities and our clients? Because there is so many options and so much available to people. And so, we have to check in regularly to make sure that what we are delivering and what we're providing is in fact relevant and meaningful.
Mm-hmm. You're like a professional translator. Hey?
I,
Just the layer. Yeah. The experts in your ecosystem, the talent around you, and making that accessible and relevant, right, to those that you immediately serve. Yeah, it's quite a powerhouse of a skill set for you and your team.
Laurie, we've also experienced your beautiful sense of building connection and sense of building community. Maybe if you could just share with us, what's your perspective on community leadership, on, places of convening conversation?
it's interesting because I don't view it as me giving. I feel very privileged
Mm,
to be able to make the connections um, in the across the
mm,
community and outside of, the work that I do. So I learn something, in every single interaction. And so investing time selfishly for me, I feel like I get more out of it than
mm,
I'm doing. I also think that, there are seasons in our lives and, I'm
mm,
benefiting from, being that season where I have, that extra time that I can create space to do more of that. But it definitely, is something that I see I get more than I give. And so I always joke that I'm a bit of a joiner, and if there's an opportunity, I'm always in it. But it's really as much as I appreciate that you want to give me credit for it, it does feel a little more selfish on my part.
mm. Yeah, it's like a true, I'm thinking about the Adam Grant, give or taker frame, and experiencing you. It is authentic, and it's who you are. It's your general store, right? Convening places and holding the community. It continues to shine. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. And then
Mm-hmm.
I go home and
Mm-hmm.
because by nature I am a little bit more of an introvert, Megan. So I do all of that and
Mm.
then I go home and I, have some quiet time alone.
Yeah, yeah. Close the blinds and decompress. Yeah, that's amazing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Lori, with all of this, then,
Mm-hmm.
what's around the corner for you in terms of your leadership stretch? Are you trying some new things on? Where's your growth and learning stretch in the space of your personal leadership?
Mm-hmm.
We are heading into our new fiscal year. And so all of that planning and thought is absolutely very timely in terms of what does that look like, Ayana. And so for me, a little bit back to when you talked about, calendar and thinking about where you invest time, it's the area that I've been thinking a lot. I think there is times where we can get on, that hamster wheel and,
Hmm.
go back to, execution. And over the last couple of months, I've really reflected and spent some time thinking about what are those big rocks? What is it that I want to achieve, and how do I give myself permission to actually take out, because it can't be additive all of the time,
Hmm.
because at the end of the day, then I start doing a whole bunch of things not incredibly well. And so, how am I taking things out so that I can really focus? So as I look ahead for me, it's around that, um, doing fewer things, but executing with excellence or leading with excellence is an area that I'm really focused on. Um, as we head into kind of the new year and kind of the next phase in my career.
Hmm. You just gave a lovely definition to what focus is and specificity. Yeah, that's beautiful. Focusing on doing fewer things and doing them and leading it with excellence. Yeah. Gold standard. Love it. Um, okay, so last question, Lori, and it's a little bit of the namesake of this podcast, Around the Corner. We've been speaking with amazing leaders like you who are future focused and who have wisdom to give and are living that wisdom. What is it that you would wish for the emerging generation of leaders, or what would you put on your billboard, the thing that we we could be learning most from you or paying attention to?
Oh, I think, as we look around the corner, there's so much uncertainty, so much concern across the world. I think that care is a big piece and understanding. I would love for us to continue to embrace having conversations, having diverse perspectives, and understanding that, there's always compromise, and that doesn't take away from beliefs and understandings, and that the goal isn't perfection, but it's progress. And that for me would be one of the areas that I'd love us all to be a little bit more tolerant of and kind towards humanity.
Yeah, can't disagree with that. And it takes all of us to the individual and the collective to make that aspiration into a reality. Yeah. Yeah. Laurie, is there anything that you would like to share that you haven't had the opportunity to say yet?
I just want to say a really big thank you. I appreciate all of you. So maybe I'll turn it back to you as you look out.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll turn that last question to both of you. And Ayana, I'll start with you. But as you look out ahead, what would you give to the future leaders and hope for? I always say hope's a bad strategy, but what would their focus be?
I think hope is a necessary ingredient for good strategy, different than optimism. So maybe I'll say two things. One, I do think we absolutely to think with a mindset of hopefulness. For me, hopefulness has a sense of generosity. It's inclusive of more than myself. It's on behalf of and with others for the sake of something greater than myself. So I think the ingredient of hope is necessary. The times now are gray in some parts of the world. We're recording this, in the fall of 2025, and there's a lot going on. And it's going to take, to your point, a collective ambition. So part of my billboard would be look to your right, look to your left, look up, look down, and say, let's get into this together. Like it's going to take all of us. Whatever the challenges that your heart is beating for, and that your feet want to march for, it's going to take all of us to make that happen. And maybe the second thing for me is to think about three keywords I've been playing with, and they are whatever you lend your leadership to, may it be true, may it be novel, may it be something that turns the ship around, and may it be meaningful. And to be able to answer those questions for ourselves, I think will help us all be oriented to giving our energies to things that make a constructive difference. So I'm thinking about that these days. So I appreciate it. And I think it hooks really beautifully to your point of many voices, diverse voices, caring, kindness is all in that mix as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
What
about you, Megan?
To Megan?
Yes.
Ayana's a hard act to follow, isn't she, Laurie?
She totally is. Yes.
Yeah. Laurie, I also grew up in a small town, and a small farming town, and we were farmers ourselves, and definitely I grew up appreciating the value of neighbors and the value of connection. And I think there's something to that I would love leaders today, and particularly our younger generation, to have exposure to and to think about is in person with each other, relationship building. I have kids that in their teenage years now, and so much is brokered, over our devices. and remembering and probably teaching, because they don't necessarily have the memory of it, but teaching them how to be with each other in person, slowing down. You know, I really loved your point on that. Um, and knowing that in some ways the obstacle is the way. You need to go through the hard things with each other and in your community to come out in a different aspect. So yeah, your conversation today has made me remember, you know, my own upbringing in that way, and that's my wish, my hope. Hmm.
We can all do hard things. I
Yeah.
believe in us.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Well
Laurie
done.
Goodfellow, thank you so much. This was
Hmm.
such a joy. I'm glad we found the time and the space, created the space to slow down and hear more of your story and your wisdom. Your team is fortunate. Your organization is fortunate that you have lended your leadership and gifts to them and the clients that you serve and the difference that you're making.
Hmm.
Thank you for teaching us today and being in conversation. And we look forward to the next time.
Hmm.
Thank you both.
We just got to have a lovely conversation with Laurie Goodfellow from RBC. And now we get to talk a little bit about what was meaningful for us in that conversation. And for anyone that just listened to the podcast, there were lots of lovely phrases that were just nuggets of wisdom along the way. Megan, what did you hear was one of your favorite phrases or turns of language that she used?
Yeah, I really appreciated her frame around leadership fluidity. I think we hear lots about servant leadership or leading from behind or beside, or, you know, it assumes you stay in that place. But I really liked her reframe around the fluidity of the locations or places you need to be at and be within as a leader, from the front, from behind, from beside. That was really, I think a great build on other frames out there, and to remember that all are required.
Time, places, different kinds of people, what they require. Yeah. Kind of look at just a refresh take on adaptiveness, right? And flexibility.
Yeah, situational
Um,
awareness, all of that. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But as you say it,
And
beside,
her
above,
hula
like,
hoops.
yeah, there's like a beat. There's a rhythm.
Yeah,
There's a
yeah,
dance.
yeah. There's a
There's a
dance.
dance here. There's a dance
Yeah,
here. Okay. I
yeah.
love that.
I liked the movement of it.
I also liked her punchy reminder. I'm a fan of alliteration, as you know,
Hmm.
that it's a lattice and a ladder,
Hmm.
lattice and a ladder, and
Hmm.
that was really helpful just for my visual brain. The little spider
Hmm.
web lattice. We can move in different places, and all of those are learning and stretch opportunities if we
Hmm.
have the mindset for that.
Hmm.
And we can also do the proverbial climb.
Hmm.
And I thought she did a lovely, subtle job of
Hmm.
reminding us that the laddering part of that orchestration, uh, when you ladder, you're focusing, ironically or, smartly, more and more on the humans, more
Hmm.
and more on the humans,
Hmm.
and how to unlock those teams and how to position care and intention, and
Hmm.
her own authentic desire to know her
Hmm.
people and motivate them to do their best work. How important that is as you're laddering and noticing that as you're latticing. Now they're
Hmm.
verbs. We're latticing and
Two
we're laddering.
lattice.
Two lattice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. She's clearly learned that along the way as her superpower in terms
Mhm.
of getting the most out of people, getting the most out of her teams. I loved her reference to whether she keeps her little black book or, you know, someone else was telling her to, but like paying attention to all those details
Yeah.
as a way to, no doubt, invite, you know, great feedback conversations, great getting to know conversations, getting the most out of people. I thought that was, you know, a great practical tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And the
Hmm.
tool part of it, surfaced in our conversation because all those stories I mean, I think we helped her see that she's got something to put on a piece of paper or
Yeah.
doodle in pencil in a performance management conversation around the Venn diagram of the care, authenticity, and growth. And as she models that and the work that she does with her teams, they too can model that in service of their base business, as she described it, relationships and advisory with others. The other thing I loved hearing a banking executive say was, we can do hard things. I'm like, right, not all cushion that ivory tower. We could do hard things together. And her posture of enthusiasm, if not excitement around that, and wanting to take that on personally and then collectively with her team, I also thought was really great.
Yeah, it's like her frame on innovation. We can do hard things. We can find, different problems to solve. We can tackle breaking problems apart, putting them together again in different ways. Yeah, the link to kind of like changing who's around the table, listening to diverse voices.
Yes.
Yeah, you can sort of see her view on how she's problem solving, how she's innovating, how she's trying to strategically execute within that world.
Let's close our debrief time together. Is there anything else that you are going to walk away with, pondering or considering out of this conversation?
She said it multiple times to us, and I think it's just such a good reminder. Where are the places and spaces where you also don't take yourself too seriously? Where can you go have fun? Where can you go, reflect and, recognize that everyone's on a journey.
Yeah. The high performance athletes we interview would say that that's about recovery. And so therefore a part of performance overall, recovery, reflection. Yeah.
Get out your hula hoops.
All right. Okay. Thanks again, Megan. We'll talk soon.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Around the Corner, where stories of leadership take many forms. If you found today's conversation meaningful, please follow the podcast and share it with others who are curious, not only about the future of leadership, but about how their leadership makes a difference.